Well, it's been a great weekend for us. It's been a weekend of celebration. There are lots of reasons for celebrating, aren't there? Birthdays, anniversaries. A few weeks ago, some people passing their exams. Whatever it is, it's great to celebrate. Celebrating is being human. All over the world, people celebrate. They might celebrate in slightly different ways, but we all celebrate. Now, I want to tell you something that you might not have thought about. Do you ever think of God celebrating? Because God is a God who celebrates. How do I know that? Well, I haven't made it up in my own imagination. I know that because of the story we've just read. I know that because of what Jesus tells us. This is the story about, well, it's famously known as the prodigal son, but it could equally be known as the forgiving father, couldn't it? The father who forgives. And the word celebrate comes 4 times in that story. And so that's why I thought it would be good, appropriate to have it today on this weekend of celebration. Jesus came to show us what God was like. To show us so we don't have to guess. Now, children will be starting school this week, and let's say there's little Billy, he goes to school, and the first lesson is drawing, and there he is drawing. Everybody can draw a picture, says the teacher. So she goes round the different children. What are you drawing? Oh, that's my daddy, or that's my house, or that's my donkey, or whatever it is. And comes to Billy. Billy, who are you drawing? Well, this is God. I'm drawing God. And the teacher says, well, Billy, I don't think this would happen today, but imagine. The teacher says, Billy, nobody knows what God is like. He's invisible. And Billy says, they will when I'm finished. Well, that's the message of Christianity. When Jesus has come into the world to show us what the invisible God is like. And we need to hear him if we want to know God. And particularly, I want us to think about this story that he's told us. What do we learn about this God here? The God who celebrates. Why does he celebrate? Well, let's follow the story then, okay? And it's got certain steps. Number 1, shameful decisions. Shameful decisions. The youngest son in this family decides to do something shameful. He goes to his father and he says, give me what I'm owed from your estate. Now, he shows no respect for his father. Now, that might be shocking in our culture, but in this culture, in Jesus' culture, and in many cultures around the world, it's a shame and honor culture. And here, the son is dishonoring his father. I want you to give me now what I deserve. In other words, I wish you were dead so that I can get the inheritance. Shameful. And then he sets off for a distant country and he brings shame on his family. He squandered his wealth in wild living, Jesus says in the story. And then the next step is even more shameful. To a Jewish audience who are listening to this story as Jesus tells it, this man becomes a slave. He's moved from a son to a slave and he becomes a feeder of pigs, and he longs to eat the pig food. Shameful decisions have brought him to that point. I think Jesus is making the point here that we can all treat God a bit like this. It's great to get God's gifts. It's been a beautiful morning this morning, beautiful sunshine, health and strength, food, All these things are God's gifts, but it's possible to enjoy God's gifts and be like this son and says, but I don't want anything to do with God. Don't speak to me about God. But I'm happy to enjoy all that he gives. And Jesus isn't afraid to point that out. And if we're like that, there's a tendency to think, we're free, aren't we? We're free. We're living like this son. But it doesn't last, does it? It doesn't last. It ends in shame. And Jesus isn't afraid to point out that there are consequences for the decisions that we make. It's not very trendy or cool to say that today, is it? We're all victims, aren't we? But Jesus says, actually, no, this man isn't a victim. He's made decisions, and he's ended up feeding the pigs. So, shameful decisions. But the story doesn't end there. We've got sensible confessions. Jesus says, this young man, this son, he comes to his senses. And he says, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? Back with Dad, he's got servants and they've got food. I haven't got anything. So I'm going to go back to my father. I'm starving to death. Jesus says he came to his senses. He started to think. He realized there was hope for him. The only hope that he had was going back to his father. Now, let me ask you, do you think that was easy for him? Do you think that was easy for him? I don't think so, do you? Sorry seems to be the hardest word. And going back, we find it very difficult to say sorry. We find it very difficult. Maybe in your home, in your family, you know what it's like. You've done something wrong, but to say sorry, to go back, to admit it, that's a hard thing. But it was the right thing, wasn't it? It was the right thing. Notice how he confesses. He says, I'll set out and go back to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. It's interesting, isn't it? He confesses he's done wrong. I've done wrong. I've sinned against you. He confesses his loss. I've lost my rights. I don't have any rights before you. And he confesses his need. I just need a job. Just make me like one of your hired servants. Make me a slave. I don't deserve it. I'm asking for your mercy. Do you know, I think Jesus is giving this story because he's telling us that the road back to celebration, the road back to joy and celebration begins with confession. That's the turning point for every one of us. Got to turn and go back to God. That could be the turning point for you this morning. God, I have sinned against you. I've treated you so badly. I've wished you were dead. I've even hated you. I've ignored you. But please forgive me. Now, when you get to that turning point, you're not mad, you know. You're not going mad when you start praying. You've come to your senses, Jesus says. You've come to your senses. And then the story goes on. What happens then? Shocking celebrations. Shocking celebrations. he starts back. Can you imagine him? He's starting back. He's rehearsing his script, what he's going to say to it. Will my Father have me back? What will he? Will he turn his back on me? And Jesus says, while he was a long way off, the Father saw him. And what did he do? He ran. He ran to him. He was filled with compassion. He threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son is about to get out his speech. And the father says, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a party. Let's celebrate. Let's have a feast. Now remember, Jesus is telling us this story to reveal to us what God is like. Remember. Isn't that really moving? It's moving at a human level, isn't it? If you were watching this on a film, on the screen, I think we'd be crying at this point. It would be so emotive. How much more then? This is what God is like for anyone who will go back to him. But it's also shocking. I think we need to get this. We might not get it so much in our culture, but in that culture, in Jesus' day, that would be shocking. First of all, for a man like this father, to run, that would be shocking. In that culture, the more important you were, the slower you moved. I'm really important. I'm moving very slowly today. But this father doesn't care about that. He runs. That's shocking. No rebuke, no punishment. And then he restores. That robe and the ring and the sandals, they're all signs of sonship. The father is saying, I welcome you back. I welcome you. You're not a slave. You're my son. And people in the audience say, what? After all the shame he's brought on you, you're not going to punish him? And then he rejoices. Let's have a feast and celebrate. He can't contain his joy. He wants everybody to come in and share this joy. Now, this is the kind of God that Jesus reveals to us. This is the kind of God he is. Amazing, shocking grace. Grace is this undeserved love. We sang that song at the beginning, didn't we? Amazing Grace. It reminds me of a story. When we were in lockdown, we couldn't meet together for a while, so we would meet on Zoom, and we'd all be sort of meeting together, sort of on screens. Remember those days? They're terrible days, weren't they? I'm glad they are over. But we found a story. It was a story of this girl called Jade. She lived up in Edinburgh. And when we sing Amazing Grace, I think of this girl's testimony. Her story, real life story. She described her background living in Edinburgh. It was pretty shocking, really. Her father left when she was about 10. Her mother was loving but kind of chaotic lifestyle. Father died when she was 13 and she didn't know anything about it. And then she went into a hostel, homeless hostel. She left home. She was there from 16 to 24. 8 years of darkness, she says. 8 years. And I saw things that a teenager should never see. And I did things that I should never have done. But one day she was watching X Factor. And someone, the contestant on X Factor, was singing Amazing Grace. And she listened to the words and she says, well, I know I'm a wretch. I know I'm a wretch. I think I've got to sort my life out. She started to change her life. She started to sort of do something different. And it worked, she says. On the outside, it worked. But on the inside, I knew there was something wrong. I was never good enough. Never good enough. And I used to tell myself, I am a good person. I am a good person. She's having this battle within herself. But she said, when I heard the gospel, the good news of Jesus, which starts with the fact that I'm a sinner, I am not good enough, she said, I realized that was true. That was true. I said, yes, that's my experience. I'm not good enough. But then I came to understand that Jesus has come to take my blame, to take away my wrong, and that I can find forgiveness through trusting in him. Jesus came to save the rebellious, she said. So John Newton, the man who wrote Amazing Grace hundreds of years ago, and Jade, and many other people realized that this story is not just the story, it's a message for us. Jesus ran, for us. Jesus ran for us. He ran to the cross. He experienced the shame as he went to the cross and was nailed there. He experienced the shame, a bit like this father here. When he took the guilt, our guilt, my guilt, upon himself, he experienced shame, mocking, hatred, God punishing his son so that we can be forgiven. That's why Christians sing a lot about the cross, not because we're morbid, but because we realize that's where we find life. And God restores us through Jesus. Jade and other people have realized that when you trust in Jesus Christ, he gives you a new coat, as it were, new clothes, takes away all the rags, all the rubbish, and he gives you something new, his own perfection, his own righteousness as you trust in him. That's a great thing to know. And God rejoices. Jesus is very clear. Whenever anyone, one individual, maybe even here this morning, when one person turns to God and trusts Jesus for forgiveness, God celebrates. God rejoices. So I want you to know, I want you to hear this, listen to this now. Whatever your past and whatever your present, whoever you are, whatever you've done, you need to know today that God is willing to forgive you and accept you freely and celebrate over you. You need to hear that this morning because of all that Jesus has done. It's a wonderful story. It's a wonderful message. But not everybody thinks it's wonderful. Did you notice in the story? Sad reactions. Sad reactions. The older brother, what does he think about this? The older brother hears the celebrations and he calls a servant. He says, what's going on? And the servant tells him, oh, your brother's come back. Your father's rejoicing. Is he happy about that? No, he's not. No, he's not. So the father goes out to him, pleads with him. Says, come on in. Come and join the party. Look what he says. He says, look, all these years I've been slaving for you. That's an interesting word. I've been slaving for you. Never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, not my brother, this son of yours, when he comes, you kill the fatted calf, you throw a party, you forgive him. What's going on here? I think Jesus wants us to see the cold heart of the older brother. Cold towards his younger brother. This son of yours, nothing to do with me. And cold heart towards his father. All these years I've been slaving for you. What does that say about his relationship with his father? I don't think it's the father's fault. Why can't the older brother join the celebration? Well, I don't think he knows his father. He doesn't have a relationship with his father. If he did, he would also rejoice over this younger brother coming back. The older brother sounds very much like the people at the beginning of the chapter, the Pharisees, the religious people who says, Jesus welcomes sinners. I have a friend who has walked 10,000 steps every day since the beginning of this year. 10,000 steps every day. Can you imagine that? Initially it was for charity, and now it's continued. But sometimes it gets a bit dodgy. You know, at the end of the day, he checks his steps. Oh, a few more thousand to do, you know. So he's got to go out and do them. Now that's very, very good for self-discipline and fitness and all that. But that's not the way you kind of govern a relationship, is it? And some people treat God like that. Is your relationship with God based upon your steps? Your keeping the rules, your morality, and so on. And so you're constantly checking, have I done enough today? Have I done enough today? Have I done enough today? If you think you've done quite well, you feel very confident. Maybe you look down on other people, like the Pharisees. But if you know you haven't done very well, you are crushed. So you get on the treadmill again. And if that's the case, you relate to God more as a master and slave rather than father and child. And you never know really the joy of God's forgiving grace. You don't know about grace, either for yourself or for others. Now, people who've been brought up in church need especially to hear this. Especially to hear Jesus at this point. One commentator says this: one of the hardest things in the world is to stop being the prodigal son without becoming the elder brother. Can you rejoice when God shows shocking grace to people? Or does it leave you cold? Sad reactions. And then the last thing just to say is a sincere conclusion. You know, Jesus concludes the story. It's wonderful. The father pleads, he says, my son, he says, everything I have, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. The father reassures the older son, listen, I love you. I love you. Don't be like this. Come in. But he's left on the outside. We don't know. We don't know if he's going to come in or not. But the invitation is there. But we need to celebrate. He said, we had to celebrate because this brother of yours was dead and he's alive again. He was lost and now he's found. We've got to celebrate. Notice the categories Jesus uses there. Dead and alive. Lost, found. Jesus, the Father, doesn't apologize for celebrating. And he ends his story very, very sincerely. He's not tricking us. He's not trying to confuse us. He means what he says here. As long as the younger brother was far away, he was lost and he was dead. As long as we are far away from God, Jesus will say, you're lost and really you're dead. You're not living. But if you come back to me, if you come back to God, you find life and you're found. I was in Tesco the other day. It's a rare occasion, but I went to Tesco, a small Tesco, not far from here. I was getting a couple of things. And you know how they play music on the Tesco, make you feel good, I think, and spend more money. A song came on. And the reason why it struck me was I heard somebody singing along to the song. And he had a really, really good voice. I thought, wow, that's unusual. He should be on X Factor. He was singing it out. It was great. And then I thought about the lyrics of the song he was singing. This is what they were. I tried carrying the weight of the world, but I only have 2 hands. Hope I get the chance to travel the world, but I don't have any plans. Wish that I could stay forever this young, not afraid to close my eyes. Life's a game made for everyone, and love is a prize. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. The tragedy of that song is that the man who sang it took his life at the age of 28. I didn't know I was lost. I don't want that to happen to you. The message of Jesus is very sincere. Come back to God through me, he says. Trust in me. Come back to God. You'll never find yourself without me. Come back to God. Come back to God. Trust in Jesus. And you'll be found. And you'll have life. He sincerely calls each one of us this morning. He's speaking to us through this story. Move from being lost to being found. Move from being dead to being alive. Jesus welcomes sinners and eats with them. And he will welcome you today. Amen. So we're going to sing a song to close now, and it's all about this. It's all about God's mercy. God's mercy. He welcomes the weakest, the vilest, the poor. Our sins, they are many. His mercy is more.